Dallas sucks. No, that's not my opinion. Don't worry. I'm not having a pop at Dallas or anything here. But amongst the Formula One community, um, if you know your history, the first thing you might think of when it comes to Grand Prix at Dallas is Dallas sucks. Now, as you can imagine, this is going to be quite the story. This is going to be a tale of woe for a Grand Prix. And the very fact that there was only one race ever held in Dallas kind of tells you everything. But here's the thing is the fact of we can focus on the race and everything like that, but actually I found it really fascinating, the stuff behind the race in the background. And that's what we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus necessarily too much on the race. We're actually going to focus on Dallas itself. And I suppose the first question is, why Dallas? Why in the 1980s did we decide in Formula One that it would be good to hold a race in Dallas? You know, similar sort of disastrous Grand Prix in America have at least had understandable beginnings. You know, Detroit, it's Motor City. We talked about it. I think as one of like our very first ones, and you know you can understand why they would want to hold a Grand Prix there. But Dallas's history, I mean, it hasn't really got a history. In fact, their most famous moment with a motor car full stop, yeah, didn't go down too well. So why Dallas? What ultimately, as you can imagine, with Bernie Ecclestone, with the way Formula One was and actually still is, it was about money. You see, in the 1980s, Dallas was becoming quite the empire, quite the money empire in the past. Massive estates, massive growth, massive uh, explosion in money and billionaires that were appearing in Dallas, and they wanted to make the most of it. So they wanted to expand it. There was three of them um, that that was spoken about, and there were three guys. The one guy that I want to mention eventually, and it'll be mentioned at the end, is a guy called Don Walker. There's a story, and we will be touching on that story later on. But yes, Dallas was a disaster. I suppose it's worth looking at Formula One tracks of why they might crash and burn at the end of a couple of races and drop off the calendar as quickly as they came on. And normally it comes under like one of four things that might happen: either really bad planning, a really bad experience for the drivers, a really bad experience for the fans, and some crime and corruption is another option. So which one's Dallas? You're right, it's all of them. All four of those reasons were the reason why Dallas only lasted for one race. Now let's focus on the planning first. So Dallas, if you don't know the city, it's in Texas in the US, and the organisers said we want to ensure that it never rains. We want to ensure that we don't have rain dampening the spirits of the Grand Prix. Side point here: rain on a Grand Prix normally brings a really good race. But to combat that, to ensure that they would have no rain, they decided to hold it in July. Now, I don't know about you, but Texas and July normally means heat wave. You can already see why this might be having a bit of a negative experience for the drivers and for the fans. And for the track. Yes, it was that hot. In fact, here is quite a famous image from the Dallas Grand Prix from 1984, right at the end. This was during the track. Now, forget about the tyres. Forget about melting the tyres off. This was melting the tarmac. After every session, what was happening was that the cars were basically burrowing a hole into the ground, and they'd have to rebuild the ground after every session. Patches and different things like that. It was nuts. So that's the track. The track was already dangerous as it was because of that. But then there was this image. This is Nigel Mansell at the end of the Grand Prix. His car had broken down about 50 metres, I believe it was, behind the track. And so he thought, okay, I'll put it in neutral. I will push the car along the line. He fainted halfway through. Now, the good news is he was fine. This was, I think it was like 5 years before he won his world championship. He was fine. But already we've got a bad experience for the drivers. And you imagine these are drivers, yes, they're close to the grounds and everything like that, but they will probably have prepared themselves for this event. If this is what the drivers were experiencing, you can imagine what the fans were experiencing. Yes, quite a bit of heat and quite a bit of problems. That's the reason why there was that fan that was written on it, Dallas sucks. That was a fan in protest. In fact, protests were the thing here. Before the race, the drivers wanted to boycott this race. Only one driver, which just so happened to be the winner in Keke Rosberg, actually was willing to even race in the first place. So that's the poor planning out the way. That's the drivers' poor problems out the way. Then the fans' poor problems out the way. Crime and corruption now. And this is wild. So I mentioned that there was 3 blokes, one of them being Don Walker, sorry. Now here's the thing. They were prepared, Dallas, the organisers behind the Dallas Grand Prix, the 3 guys, to give it a go. Learn their lessons. Okay, July is off the table. Let's do it in April or March. Let's do it at another time. They were approaching Bernie Ecclestone to see if they could give it a go. But here's the interesting thing. Don Walker mysteriously bought out one of the guys and then decided to make all the decisions on behalf of the other one. Now, interesting enough, Don Walker wasn't the guy that came up with this idea in the first place. He was basically the investor. And, well, he then ended up being on the end of an FBI investigation. Because you see, there were accusations being made that he was using the F1 Grand Prix, siphoning the money off and using it for his own holidays, his own yachts. The money that was meant to be funding the Grand Prix was funding Don Walker personally. Now, I did some extensive research into this, and it was fascinating. The fact that I could even see news articles from 1988 and things like that of exactly the extent of which it was. But ultimately, it killed it off. And it was sad that it killed it off because some of the guys that were helping promote it, the Grand Prix, was people like Carroll Shelby. You know, that legendary car designer behind the Shelby Cobras. This had so much potential, but it was rushed, poorly planned, and taken advantage of. But let's look at the positives here, because if this Dallas Grand Prix had carried on and struggled on, and they'd work things out, and we'd have a street circuit constantly, everything like that, would we have a Circuit of the Americas? One of the best tracks on the calendar that's also based in Texas. There's a lot of lessons learned from American Grand Prix for Formula One organisers and everything like that. Mainly, don't just come up with an idea of a Grand Prix in a place without working out where you're going to put it. And street tracks are okay, but not in the middle of a blooming city centre. Do not do that. That doesn't work out. And do you know what? There was actually an extra problem in keeping the Dallas Grand Prix. You see, they wanted to resurrect it. I think it was in the early 90s. They wanted to resurrect the idea of having a Grand Prix in Dallas. But here's the problem. Holding Grand Prix in city centres ultimately means potentially closing off the businesses that are on the side. And this was an area that was predominantly black communities and poor communities as well. And it didn't sit right with the city that, in a sense, they were going to be shutting down businesses that were just about coping for the benefit of 20 rich white guys racing around a track. And that makes sense. Formula One is meant to serve alongside the community, not interfere with it. It always feels weird seeing Formula One tracks, even what we're seeing in the future in regards to in the Madrid city centre. Las Vegas I'm fine with. Overly expensive anyway, so shutting down businesses for a day is probably not going to do them too much harm. But when it starts impacting on poorer communities, gets a bit dodgy. But like I say, lessons learned. None of the guys that had any involvement, including Bernie Eccleston, have any more involvement in Formula One. And we do have a racetrack in Texas, and a much better one than the one in Dallas. So that was Dallas. Managed to get a lot more into it than expected. Now let's see which track we're going to be having next. This will be the track that we'll be doing next week. All things considered, all events considered, just in case something might interrupt like it did last week. But let's see where we go. We've got a lot of tracks to do. Let's see which one we're doing next. It is going to be Marina Bay, which I'm pretty sure is the Singapore Grand Prix. I will double check. Yes, it is the Singapore Grand Prix. It's going to be a very fascinating one. I've loved the history of Singapore, of the night races and everything like that. We will get to talk about it in more detail. I was about to say later on. Next time, which will most likely be next week. Until next time, guys, feel free to watch the previous videos of the Ninja Tour playlist on YouTube, and like and subscribe, all that jazz. And until next time, guys, take care.